Hi YouTube, I'm Kate and this is Bunny, and you might know us as Bunny the Golf on Instagram or TikTok, and the people on there wanted me to make some YouTube videos, so here I am. Now Bunny is my very first car and my first car build, so it's kind of a learning process for me, and I've just been documenting that on social media. But I figured that I should kind of condense it down into a couple videos and post that on YouTube so that people could see the whole journey in one place. So Bunny here is an LS swap, front engine to mid-engine and front wheel drive to rear wheel drive. I put a Porsche Boxster transmission in her so that she can do that. And I made the adapters for that myself, as you'll see. I also built a full cage for her to support the new engine. And right now I'm working on a body kit. So back in 2022, I was a third-year college student and I'd never had a car before, but I knew that I wanted a car and I knew that I wanted it to be cool. So I went on Facebook Marketplace for a project car. I looked at a lot of old Volvos, but mostly Volkswagens because my family has always had Volkswagens, from my grandfather to my mother and now me. Eventually, I found this adorable little Golf, and it was quite a ways away and I didn't have a way to get there. So I begged all of my friends to drive me to see this car, but none of them would. So I gave up on seeing the Golf, and I was pretty sad about it, and eventually one of my friends noticed and finally offered to drive me. I happily accepted and we drove about half an hour to where she was. This is the first time I saw her. She was sitting in a lot with some other cars and she was looking a little bit sorry. I had made a checklist of things that I wanted to check on the car before buying, and as I was examining her, she just kept on failing every single item on the checklist, but I couldn't help falling in love with her. I took her on a test drive and I drove her home that same day. I parked her behind my apartment building and I started documenting what she looked like at the beginning. Her floors felt a little spongy when you stepped on them, and the reason for that was that the metal was completely rotted out and the only thing holding the floor together was the carpet and the brake lines. It was especially bad in the footwells of the passenger and driver's seats. The car was all original, complete with the cloth seats and all of the plastics. Unfortunately, her seals had gone bad quite a while ago and the interior was very wet and moldy. The headliner was starting to disintegrate, and there was a strange substance, which I believe was oil, in the backseat footwells. I found this fluffy material under the trunk lid, and it reminded me of my grandfather's Polo that had an entire interior in this weird fluffy stuff. The mold had spread throughout the car, so I knew that my first order of business would be to take the interior out. Her engine bay was dirty, but her little 1.6 diesel was going strong with 72 horsepower. I decided to name the car Bunny in honor of my mom's first car, a Rabbit from the 80s. Over the next few months, when I wasn't in school, I spent most of my time working on Bunny. I'd removed as much from the interior as I could while trying to remember where all of the pieces came from. I used some basic hand tools and of course a mask to avoid breathing in the mold. As I went, I documented all of the strange new things that I found, as I'd never worked on a car before. This is what Bunny sounded like with her original engine and exhaust. She often had a tough time starting, even though it wasn't that cold. That's better, Bunny. You got this. I found this note from the inside of a fortune cookie that someone had left in the car. I think it was foreshadowing of what I was going to do with Bunny. Once I had taken out the seats, I started ripping up the carpet. I tried to keep it all in one piece, but eventually gave up on that. Removing the carpet revealed a floor made of mostly rust chips, and there were several metal patches that previous owners had welded in to keep the floor structural. I realized that I was going to have to rebuild the floor no matter what. In order to preserve Bunny's original plastics, I started just taking them out so that I could store them and they wouldn't get damaged in the process of replacing the floors. It took a lot of shimmying and wiggling because I didn't want to damage any of the plastic. Here you can see the brake lines in the rear passenger seat that were holding up the floor. The seat brackets were barely connected, and just with hand tools, I was able to knock out most of the passenger side floor. Somehow, the central tunnel was still very well preserved. I bought some tools from a big box store and got to work removing all the rest of the rusty parts of the floor. I worked on and off through the whole summer, mostly in the evening when it wasn't as hot. This whole process took place where I had parked Bunny behind my apartment building, and I didn't have any garage space, so I kept all of my tools inside of her. I spent a lot of my time alone during this time because I was so happy to have a car that I could work on. I realized that this was going to be a pretty long project and that I should document it as I go, so I started taking time lapses and videos. However, out of convenience, these were all vertical, which is why the formatting on this video is a little bit strange. You may be wondering how it is that I was able to use all of these loud power tools in the driveway of my apartment, and it turns out that I wasn't, so management told me to move. I asked around, and my friend Frank offered a space on his driveway that I could work on. So I packed all of my things into what was left of Bunny and drove her over. At this point, she had no floors, so I was just sitting on top of the open road as I drove. Once I got Bunny to her new home, I knew that I wouldn't be moving her that much, so I really started to rip into her. I focused on the floors as they were the most urgent, removing anything that had any rust on it. Once in a while, I would have to move Bunny to let other people park on the driveway. I left the crossbar of the seat bracket in the driver's side just for this purpose so that I could sit on the floor and drive her. At this point, Bunny had lost her reverse gear for some reason, but luckily, the driveway was on a steep slope, so all I had to do to back up was release the handbrake a little bit. Bunny still didn't have any seals, so in lieu of a garage, I bought a car cover and I worked under that. Once I had removed enough of the floors, I started mocking up the new floors with some cardboard. to a metals outlet and bought 2 big sheets of mild steel. There was a little one-car garage at the end of the driveway, and Frank cleared it out for me so that I could put Bunny inside. Bunny's a very small car, only 13 feet long, but she barely fit in this tiny space. Still, it was much better than being outside. I took my metal to the school's metal shop, where I could use their facilities and tools and make as much noise as I wanted to. I hand bent Bunny's floor pans so that they would match up with what was left of the floor in the car already. Unfortunately, while I was cutting, some sparks rooster-tailed into an air vent and it started smoking. I panicked and called the guy who runs the shop, and he figured out that it was just an air filter that had caught on fire and there was no bigger problem, luckily. The air filter was very old and full of dust, so it was probably time for a replacement anyway. Once I finished bending the panels, I held them under my arm and rode my bicycle over to where Bunny was. It took a lot of test fitting, marking up, and cutting to get them to fit perfectly. And there was still a lot of rusty material left to remove. Eventually, the dry fit of one of the floor pans looked like this, and I was very proud of myself. Every day during the summer of 2022, I went to see Bunny and work on her. Every morning, I would wake up, pack a lunch, and head over to Bunny on my bicycle. And then after a few hours of working on her, I would go to class, often covered in grime. I like to eat apples, and every day I would leave my apple core out for this little fellow. He would come back every day and seemed very interested in what I was doing with Bunny. There were a lot of interesting things about Bunny as well, from the dirt under this cover to the little wasp nest that I found inside of the chassis that had long been abandoned. As fall approached, it started to get cold, and I would warm my hands on my angle grinder. It was difficult to find good places to weld the floor pans to, because Bunny's unibody was made of such thin material. But I was up for the challenge. A friend had given me a crash course on how to weld, so I bought a helmet and I rented a welder and I got to work. I was using a MIG machine with .30 wire, and it was very difficult to get a good connection between the floor pan and the chassis without burning away the chassis, as it was only about 22 gauge. It took a long time to get the settings and the technique just right. Thanks for watching my first YouTube video. Check us out on socials for spoilers in the build, and if you choose to, you can support us on Patreon. Later!